Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Another HSR analysis. Today we are looking at the next 5-star, Kafka, who is, in fact, a Lightning character. Another one in a row. That's two in a row, I think, now. And Lightning Nihility character. I think this is our first Nihility 5-star, which, for those who don't know, Nihility means debuffer. Putting debuffs on enemies, reducing stats, just adding dots over time to them, so on and so forth. And to pretty much give a bit of a TLDR at the start here, Kafka is the latter of that. She's a dot damage dealer, a debuffer that deals damage. Because there's very little actual debuffing, what I would personally classify as debuffing, but we'll explain that as we go along her kit. So let's get into it and have a look at everything. Skipping over the basic, as that doesn't change. The skill, we start off with dealing lightning damage equal to a certain percentage of Kafka's attack to a single enemy, and lightning damage equal to another certain percentage of Kafka's attack to adjacent enemies. Again, adjacent means, or that whole thing is main primary enemy at the start, and then you have the two characters to the left and the right of the enemy, the main enemy. That's the adjacent. If the main target is currently receiving damage over time, or dots, all dots currently on the enemy will immediately apply damage equal to a certain percentage of their dot damage multiplier. This is a rather ridiculous kind of concept, in my opinion. This is a rather ridiculous, and ridiculous I mean in a positive way. This is kind of an interesting and coolish way, I would say. I've never kind of seen this, except for a bit in World of Warcraft, way of dealing DPS with dots. Practically, or essentially, an enemy will have a dot, and this is only applied to the main target of the skill, right? So the single enemy. The main target will have a dot on them. Let's say it is just burn. Well, when the main target is hit with Kafka's skill, the dot will trigger instantaneously, right? So you'll have that initial damage of 154, and then you'll have the dot do a tick of 130% of its value. The actual dot damage itself is dependent on whose dot it was applied, who applied the dot and whatnot, but regardless of that, it's 130% of that dot value. Obviously on the high end, I'm looking at this on the high end, so, take that with how much you will. 125 will generally be the standard. 130 is if you've built the character. And it's quite an interesting way to do this. Obviously, it's only applied to the main character, so the main target, rather. But it's a rather interesting way to do dot builds. Obviously, if you have multiple dots on the character, if you have wind shear, burn, shock, so on and so forth, if you have a lot of dots on the character, all of them will be triggered at once, which may spark a dot build in mind where you can apply, a multiple dots, like 3-4 dots on a character. Come in with Kafka, she triggers them all, and it's a lot of damage, because to be quite frank with you, it would be a lot of damage just from a single skill usage. But that is the skill. It's quite, I just wanted to explain that because that's kind of how Kafka works. From here on, I'll probably just kind of skim over these kind of parts, because that is pretty much the general premise of her character, is just instant ticking dots on enemy hit, right? But let's move on to the ultimate. Now, the ultimate is deal lightning damage equal to a certain percentage of Kafka's attack to all enemies, with a 100% base chance for enemies to be shocked and immediately take damage equal to a certain percentage of the original damage received. So she has a chance to shock. Now, it's 100% base chance. That means that it is alterable with effect hit rate. So bear that in mind when you're going into this. And I will make a slight note here that you probably will go for an effect hit rate build with her, as she's got no other no other builds to do. You wouldn't really go for crit, you wouldn't really go for anything else, so I'll just put that TLDR kind of like little note there. Anyway, so the shock lasts for 3 turns, and then when shocked, enemies receive lightning damage equal to a certain percentage of Kafka's attack at the beginning of each turn. Just a little dot that she applies. Shock it is. That's all that is. Going on to the talent. After an ally uses a basic attack on a shocked enemy, Kafka immediately deals lightning damage equal to a certain percentage of her attack to that enemy. This effect can only be triggered once per turn, so it's kind of like a little counter effect, or a little like follow-up attack kind of like effect there. Only once per turn, but it has to also be a basic attack by an ally, so it's a bit more iffy, but it is just a little bit of bonus damage there. Quite standard. Onto the technique. When technique is used to enter battle, deal 50% of Kafka's attack as lightning damage to a random enemy. At the same time, all enemies have a 100% base chance to be shocked for 3 turns. While shocked, enemies will take 50% of Kafka's attack as lightning damage at the start of each turn. To be actually quite frank with you, this wouldn't be a bad one to actually start with, as well. You kind of apply shock to everyone, right? You have a chance to apply shock, and if you go for an effect hit rate build, this would be a good one to engage with. And if I'm to use, let's say 2 builds off the top of my head, going for maybe Himiko's technique to put down the burn field, and then starting off with Kafka's technique to engage in battle, that means that you'll potentially be able to apply 2 dots to all enemies at the start of the whole round or start of the battle, and that means you can immediately start off with Kafka's skill and go straight into massive damage. You'll be ticking it higher and doing incredibly high damage just with a mere skill. So bear that in mind, that this one could situationally be very useful, as dot application is the name of the game with this character, and she's doing tons of damage. So far, the character sounds pretty interesting, pretty great. A dot kind of based character, but not in the sense that she is the dot applier, but she's the dot. It's kind of hard to use the word right here. The dot usurper, the dot damage usurper, but that again is a very loose term. She thrives from dot damage. But obviously, let's continue. First trace, Thorns. When Kafka uses her basic attack on a shocked enemy, the shock state immediately deals damage equal to 40% of the original damage received. It's a bit more of like a, use Kafka's basic attack to do the same thing like it was in the skill. You just trigger the dot damage immediately, but obviously it is at 40% of the original value. Second trace, Plunder. If an enemy is defeated while shocked, Kafka additionally regenerates 10 energy. Another reason that you may even go for a shock team, just pure shock, maybe like an additional burn character or something like that, but having the enemies constantly be shocked is very important here, and you can actually get a lot of value out of this, in my opinion, specifically in AoE situations when you're fighting enemies after enemies after enemies. Being able to regen a lot of energy is very important. And then last one, Fear. Shocked enemies deal 20% less damage to Kafka. Not an extremely important one, but if it is a dire situation where Kafka's one of the last few alive and all the enemies are shocked, you're going to be taking less damage. But overall, not incredibly useful. And the character, by the way, baseline, I think is actually great. I think this is a great character. It's a unique playstyle. You need to utilize dots, and if you want the highest value from Kafka alone, you're going to want to run multiple dots. I'd say try to run 3 different dots. 2 is like a standard. I would say try to run shock and burn. They're kind of easily applied. There's a fair few characters that do it. I believe Hook applies burn quite easily. Himiko applies burn to a decent degree. As for shock, I can't, maybe Serval, I can't exactly remember all the shock characters or the electric characters, but there are a few characters that do it, and that is where this character will thrive, is in dots. Obviously, as we've noticed, that she just causes them to instantly do it. I'm not sure, I would clarify this, is that I'm unsure if the instant application of the dot, essentially causing it to be immediately apply the dot damage, I'm not sure if that will consume a turn, because obviously each dot is only on the enemy for a certain amount of turns. I'm unsure if this initial application of damage will consume a turn. I would assume yes, but if it isn't, that's a nice bonus, right? If it doesn't consume it, that is a nice bonus. But again, the character can be fine and dandy standalone, but I love to look at eidolons for certain characters, and Kafka does, in fact, in my opinion, have some goddamn nasty eidolons, so let's get into them. Eidolon 1. When Kafka is attacked, there's a 100% base chance to inflict shock on the attacker. This shock state has the same effect as that applied by her ultimate. Very powerful, by the way. This is why you go for an effect hit build rate. If you go for Eidolon 1, she gets smacked, she applies shock. Bada bing, bada boom. More shock on the enemies is more welcome. It's great. That end of story. Eidolon 2. Kafka's talent can trigger 2 times each. If we remember, Kafka's talent is essentially when an ally basic attacks, Kafka will then follow up with an attack. I believe it's on a shocked enemy, right? Yeah, when an ally uses a basic attack on a shocked enemy, Kafka will then follow up doing an attack. It's again, trigger twice per turn. It's fine. It's not going to be like a game changer, but it's just going to be more damage on top of more damage. So it's all welcome. Eidolon 3, skill +2, basic attack +1, standard. Decapo, Eidolon 4. This one is the kicker, and this is the one that I think is always powerful. And I want to say before we get into it, Eidolon 4s seem to be the ones that are really powerful for certain characters, and are going to be the overall power, Eidolon in HSR, unlike in Genshin, where it's C6 usually. That is the main one, the focal point of every character. Eidolon 4 seems to be the most integral piece of the puzzle, because I think this one is great and incredibly powerful. So after Kafka uses her ultimate, instead of enemies immediately receiving damage from the shock state, enemies will now immediately receive damage from all currently applied dots. This one kind of changes how you would view her ultimate, because it kind of changes her ultimate into the... If every enemy has a dot, they will take the damage that you deal with Kafka's actual ultimate. It'll apply the shock, and then all dots on all enemies will be triggered to deal one single hit of damage. It's very powerful if you do a dot build, but then again, that is the premise of this character. So in a prime situation, Eidolon 4 is immensely powerful, and you could get incredible value from this. So I feel like this is a massive game changer in the grand scheme of her whole kit. As for Eidolon 5, Ultimate +2, Talent +2, Standard. Eidolon 6, Fortissimo, which is quite or rather I think it's Fortissimo, quite a fun word to say. When Kafka's talent is triggered for the first time in battle, the damage dealt increases by 120%, and enemies immediately receive damage from shock equal to 100% of the original dot damage multiplier. This one is quite strong, but it's not like a gameplay changer. It's just going to be extra damage. It's kind of like Eidolon 2. It's just more damage. Now, is it a lot more damage? Yes, it's a lot more damage. But it is just one time for the first time in battle, and essentially that one enemy that does take the hit from her talent for the first time in battle takes a fuck ton of damage, right? Simply put, that's all it is. So it's not a gameplay changer. Where the gameplay changer is Eidolon 4. But if we summarize and kind of look at the Eidolons in terms of value, pretty much up to Eidolon 2 is going to be your pretty high value. Eidolon 1 is probably going to be the best bang for your buck, as it's very short investment, pretty high value. After that, you're kind of getting pretty mid-value until Eidolon 4, where that's the highest value of the character, in my opinion. And then Eidolon 6 is if you're looking to min-max and have the strongest kind of Kafka. But Eidolon 1 is like kind of where it's at, because that maximizes shock application. And that's kind of what you need for the character, is just shock application. Dot uptime and shock application is the name of the game in this situation. So that's probably where I'd say is the highest value, then E4, and then E6. That's all. The character is pretty fucking cool. I think she will be rather strong in the overall meta at the start of the game, and I can see her being, indefinitely powerful, as being able to trigger all dots on the character with just a single attack is very powerful in the grand scheme of things, because it scales infinitely into the future with future characters, right? If a future character applies a stronger dot, then Kafka will obviously be able to utilize to her advantage and capitalize on that damage. So Kafka, by the way, right now is very powerful, I would say. Very, very powerful. Now, light cones make a character infinitely more powerful. Now, unfortunately, Kafka doesn't have her own signature light cone. I'm not sure why, but as of right now, the 5-star Nihility ones are only in the name of the world, which is Welt Yang's. Now, will this one be good? Well, it increases the wearer's damage to debuffed enemies, so you will be getting a damage bonus to enemies that have any kind of dot on them, because dots are debuffs, essentially. They're classified as debuffs. And then when the wearer uses their skill, the effect hit rate of this attack increases by a certain percentage, and attack increases by a certain percentage. So, it's good. You're not getting a usefulness out of the effect hit rate, as Kafka's skill doesn't actually apply a dot, so the effect hit rate boost there doesn't do anything. But you are capitalizing off of the debuff damage increase, because obviously you're only going to be... Well, you should try to only attack debuffed enemies, try to apply shock or some sort of dot to them, so you will get that bonus. And then the attack increases obviously to your skill, which I'm not 100% sure if it translates into the dot damage multiplier dealt. I don't believe it would, because this is a different multiplier. But yeah, you're getting some of it. So it's a good option, and it's probably going to be your best option compared to the 4 stars. But it would be nice if we did see a Kafka one in the future. That would be very nice to see, because 5 stars having their own signature weapon is... I like that. I like that in games. It's the reason I like playing Honkai Impact a lot, because characters have their signature weapon, signature builds, and when you get that, you know you're going to perform well. Unlike in some characters in Genshin, where some characters don't have a signature weapon, something that doesn't necessarily work 100% for them, and you're losing some value here and there. But I digress, sorry, that was a little bit of a ramble. Onto the 4 stars, because that's what we're mostly going to be running on the character. Probably Eyes of the Prey is going to be one of your best options for the 4-star. Increases effect hit rate of its wearer by a certain percentage, and increases damage over time by a certain percentage. So it buffs you in every single way, and it will be your best in slot until you maybe. And honestly, it might even beat out in the name of the world if you are lacking in effect hit rate. That specific scenario, it may outweigh Mr. Welt Yang's signature, but that is that. A good night's sleep well, for every debuff the enemy has, the damage dealt by the wearer increases by a certain percentage, stacking up to 3 times. This also applies to dots. Good night's sleep well in an ideal world will be your best one, by the way, because for every dot on the enemy, you deal more damage. In an ideal world, you want 3 dots on the enemy, right? Let's say you're doing a single target situation. Having 3 dots on the enemy would be the ideal world because you're capitalizing off of the mechanic of Kafka, which is to trigger those dots instantaneously upon hitting the enemy with your skill, right? So in an ideal world, Good Night Sleep Well is a very good one because let's say on the high end of 24%, you can get a total of, what is that, 48, you can get 70% damage increase, and this also applies to the dots, right? Now, not the dots that you haven't applied with Kafka, but regardless, you still get a massive bonus. Now, I think it was 72, actually, not 70. My maths is terrible, sorry. But you get a massive percentage increase. And then we will meet again after the wearer uses the basic attack or skill. The wearer's damage, the wearer deals, an X amount of damage, attack as additional damage to a random enemy. Don't use me, we will meet again. These two are going to be your best kind of choices for Kafka. Eyes of the Prey is going to be your universal kind of like, this is good for me right now, and I'm just going to go with it. But if you're going for like her best in slot build, you have very good stats. Good Night Sleep Well is going to be her best for now. And then, in the name of the world, just slap it on. I guess if you have it, if you have nothing else to do, just slap it on there. It'll be fine. I have no opinion about this one because it's just fine. It's a 5-star, right? It's a 5, so you can't go wrong with a 5-star weapon. But onto the relic sets. We have a few options. It's easy to recommend the elemental one, 4-set Band of the Sizzling Thunder. You can easily recommend this one and you'll get value out of it. It is lightning damage increase, and when the wearer uses a skill, increase the wearer's attack by 25% for 1 turn. It's fine. You can get value out of it. It doesn't do any harm. You'll get a damage increase, absolutely. But you could kind of mix up the build and go for a bit more utility, because the character is a Nihility character, and that is the debuffing supporting role. It's not a main DPS role, in my honest opinion. And I don't really, in any game, believe that a debuffer is a main DPS role. So I would recommend going for a bit more of a supportive build with the character, which my recommendation, again, I preface, you can go for 4-set Band of Sizzling Thunder. It's absolutely fine. But 2-set Band of Sizzling Thunder, which is just the 10% lightning damage bonus, which is, I think getting that is great. So 2-set lightning damage bonus, and then comboing that with a bit of break effect. Because I think having break effect is an incredibly important thing in the game, right? You need to be able to break the weaknesses, because that in itself also applies a dot. As we, if I can quickly find it here, I believe it's down the bottom of this page. Whenever you weakness break an enemy with the certain element, you get a dot application, right? If you do it with freeze, you get frozen. If you do it with burn, or fire, you get burn. If you do it with physical, you get bleed. So being able to weakness break the enemies as a way of dot application is extremely important, right? So that is why, purely just for Kafka, I recommend the break effect. Generally speaking, for other characters that are just DPSs, I would say get the 4-set of the element. But because it's Kafka and she's dot dependent, and there is a way to apply dots through break effect, go for 2-set Thief of Shooting Meteor and 2-set Band of Sizzling Thunder for your relic set. As for your planetary ornament, this one just go full either effect hit rate or break effect, depending on which one you need. I wouldn't say go for damage. If you want to go for damage, there's no harm done, but my recommendations are mostly hit rate, if you are lacking the hit rate. If you aren't lacking the hit rate because of substats and, light cones, then go for break effect. Supply the one that you do not have the most of here, right? Get the one that you are lacking, so you kind of have an overall boost instead of like a high peak in one and a low kind of like bottom in another, right? You kind of want to have both of them be really high so you're performing well in both areas. And that's kind of the recommendation. That's simply how it is. I wouldn't recommend going for any of the crit ones, as I don't think the character really thrives from that, because I don't think the dot damage that you trigger from that incident hit can crit. So there's no real point of doing it, because that's where most of her damage is going to be coming from, right? So that's been Kafka. A quick summary of the relics again. The relic sets are 2-set Lightning, 2-set Thief of Shooting Meteor. with the planetary ornaments being either pan-galactic commercial enterprise or Talia Kingdom banditry. And that's been Kafka. I think this character, again, like I said, has a lot of longevity built into her because she's a character that thrives from other characters' powers, right? She's a character that thrives from other characters being strong. So if future characters are released and they are good dot damage dealers, Kafka will intrinsically thrive from their, their kind of thriving. I don't know the right word for that one. But yeah, that is how the character works. She's has a lot of longevity, and honestly, if you get her early days, getting more constellations / eidolons is going to be even more, rewarding. So yeah, great character, 10 out of 10 so far, amazing. Hope you guys did enjoy. If you liked the video, like and subscribe to the channel. More HSR analysis coming in the future, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Stay safe. Peace out.